By 1993, Yu Suzuki has radically redrawn the landscape of arcades around the world. Moving cabinets and realism are his trademarks. But his next project adds an entire new dimension to gaming.
3D was something that I was interested in for my days at university. In fact, my thesis at university was about 3D. I'd always been wondering what I could do with that technology. Around that time, the president of Sega realized that Capcom had a fighting game called Street Fighter II, and that was very popular. And he was very concerned that Sega was always losing to competitors in the fighting game area. So he asked me if I could come up with a game that could be competitive in the field. And I said, I don't know if I'll be successful, but of course, I'll give it a try.
Yu Suzuki begins production on his next endeavor, but his lack of martial arts knowledge forces a much-needed trip to China.
I didn't know very much about martial arts, especially Chinese kung fu. I had no experience at all, so I actually decided to take a trip to China and learn from the martial arts masters. I visited the Shaolin Temple, and all these experts taught me many things about martial arts. In the process, I cracked some ribs, and I suffered a bump to the head. At that time, it was very difficult for me, but looking back on it now, of course, they're just fond memories.
Even Yu Suzuki, I heard say that people thought he was crazy to go after Street Fighter or to make a competitor, direct competitor, Street Fighter. Apparently, one day during testing, Yu Suzuki heard one of the guys say, "ouch," while he was playing the game, and that's when he knew that he had some kind of connection with the player, that this was more than just a fighting game, that this was an actual experience.
There has never been another game where we knew it was going to succeed even before we completed making the game. We knew that this was something that really was going to take off.
In 1993, Virtua Fighter is released, and audiences are stunned.
The number one thing that was huge about Virtua Fighter was that it was in 3D, and that was a big, big deal. And the other thing, too, was that nobody really thought that you can make a better game than Street Fighter as far as fighting was concerned. And they took a bold step in making this 3D fighting game. Yu Suzuki wanted to create a realism out of it. This was a game where they used real fighting techniques, real martial arts. They weren't doing over-the-top flying stuff. They were just punching and kicking, and it was about strategy and tactics.
People flock to the arcades and begin to master the complex fighting systems.
Ring out! Yeah! To be able to enjoy that same kind of sensation with only a joystick, only a button, and you're still just as excited, and you're still sweating, and you're so into the fight, something like that has never been around. This is the first game that's allowed people to enjoy that kind of intensity.
The gameplay mechanics of Virtua Fighter are just really hardcore and accurate, you know, just like the man himself. You know, it's very meticulous, it's a very studied game.
People reacted very favorably to Virtua Fighter.
The success of Virtua Fighter leads to inevitable spin-offs.
Virtua Fighter created a whole new pantheon of characters for Sega. From that, Sega created all kinds of games based on the Virtua Fighter. Virtua Fighter Kids, Virtua Fighter Master System games that were just like little storybooks, and you know, you had big, fat-headed, you know, Virtua Fighter kid characters and stuff like that, and it really created a whole franchise of characters for Sega.
Sega also brings Virtua Fighter to its home console, the Sega Saturn.
So this was the first time also where people were able to practice their moves at home and then show up in an arcade with all the stuff that they did at home. You know, they did homework, and then they show their skills at the arcade, and I think that was a huge phenomenon that kind of combined the home and the arcade.
In 1995, Sega releases the follow-up to the original.
Well, Virtua Fighter 2 was significantly different from Virtua Fighter, and that's when it started to get a little bit of the over-the-topness to it. But that was more for the hardcore fighting fan. Then by the time Virtua Fighter 3 came out, that was a huge, huge leap, both in technology and in looks and everything. He also created Virtua Fighter 3 TB, which was an enhancement of Virtua Fighter 3. Virtua Fighter 3 became the fighting game of choice for the Japanese at that time. If you were an expert at Virtua Fighter 3 or Virtua Fighter 3 TB, then, you were the bomb. You were the guy that people looked at you in the arcades. It solidified Virtua Fighter even more as a tournament-type fighting game.
The success of Virtua Fighter eventually moves beyond the game industry and Japan.
In 1998, the Virtua Fighter series was accepted by the Smithsonian for the Computer World Smithsonian Award. And all of the Virtua Fighter machines, I think up to Virtua Fighter 3, is displayed in Smithsonian for everybody to look at from now until the end of time. And that's a huge accomplishment. I think it was a big deal for Yu Suzuki to have his games shown at the Smithsonian Institute. That's a big deal, is to have something like Virtua Fighter be accepted by mainstream America as a real work of art or a real accomplishment in technology. That's something that we all should be proud of.
In a little more than a decade, Yu Suzuki changed the way we play video games. But he is about to face some serious obstacles.
And the one great thing about Suzuki-san and about Sega is traditionally they have been a company that have been risk takers and always pushing the envelope.